My name is Kelly Mahon, and I am here representing the 1925 WACO 9 of Mid-America Flight Museum here at Mount Pleasant, Texas. This is the oldest airplane in the fleet at the museum, and we're very proud of it. This airplane was restored by Frank Pavliga, and when we bought it, we decided for safety's sake that we would bring the airplane home on a trailer. With all of our other projects, it sat on the trailer for a while, or in the hangar disassembled, and the crew decided that we needed to get it back together so it was safer, and I wasn't going to put it together without us getting to fly it right away. So we decided that was the way to go. I want to just talk about the Weaver Aircraft Company. This is really their first design that was successful. So this is the Model 9. This is type certificate number 11. This is the 9th serial number of it. There's one other flying, and it is serial number 4 in Hood River, Oregon. Serial number 9, and that's out of 270. So of these early airplanes, most of them you don't even know, but in that first batch of 11 type certificates, there's the Fokker Super Universal. There's also the Boeing 40. Those are some airplanes that we would know. But let's just start talking about some of the details of this airplane. It's mostly all about simplicity and lightweight. We're using one of the very early, 1918 vintage Curtiss OX5 engines, which were left over so much from military service. So it only has 90 horsepower. This is a big 3-place airplane with only 90 horsepower. So we've got to really think simplicity. Most of the airports of the time were grass, so big square runways, so they always landed into the wind, so there wasn't much need for brakes or a tail wheel. So we have a skid on this airplane, and what's interesting about this, you can see the chains and the springs, where this is actually a steerable tail skid, and so you can see it turns easy. That is surprisingly well designed, where you can steer it very easily even with a little bit of wind in the grass. And you notice that there is no adjustable stabilizer here. This is all just bolted together. So the trim condition of the airplane is purely luck of the draw with how you load the airplane with people and fuel. When we first put it together and flew it, we noticed quite a bit of nose down trim. So I pulled it apart and re-shimmed the tail to give us a little bit better trim condition. And the airplane was not very happy there. It was quite unstable when we got a little bit of speed. A little bit of speed meaning 75 miles an hour instead of 65. So I immediately came back, put it right back where it was. And so it's just a little bit nose heavy. This airplane's steel tube in a lot of places. The tail feathers have a lot of steel in it. Steel tube fuselage. We've got wood formers and then covered with fabric. And this was done in Stitz. When you come and look at the cockpit, once again, you're thinking about the simplicity. You're not going to find a trim indicator because we don't have trim. We have a single mag switch, and we have a throttle control. We have a fuel selector that's on or off. But notice that we have a rudder bar and no brake pedals. It's just not very much to it. And when we come up and look at the panel, there's no airspeed indicator. The only airspeed indicator is out on the wing. We'll show you that in a second. But just very, very simple, clean construction, wicker seats. The first time that I saw the airplane was after it made it to Mount Pleasant, and it was in the hangar. The wings were off in racks sitting next to the fuselage, and everything's very nicely finished. So when we started talking about putting it together, where do you go to find rigging instructions for the wings on a WACO 9? There's very few WACO 9s. We're used to the WACO 10s, but if you see up here, the WACO 10 would have a center section, and so the cabane struts would come out here, but this is just 2 wing panels connected in the middle, and it only has 2 ailerons instead of 4 ailerons. So as we start putting together all the rigging, the good news is the airplane had been together before, so the cables were close to being rigged. So now it's time to assemble the airplane, and without very much for instructions on the rigging, we have to rely on tribal knowledge from other people in the industry, and that's okay, because with antique airplanes, the airplane is only, you know, maybe 60% of the fun. It's really all about the people that we get to share this with. So when we started rigging the wings, we had a nice day. We were trying to get it all done in time for flying it that particular day, because it was winter like it is today. Nice and cool days, which are nice when you have a low horsepower engine, but we were running out of time. So how do I get all of our things done? Well, the chicken stabber's here to stabilize the cables. I didn't have enough time to get them done, so we had some people visiting, and I put them to work. And those two ended up turning it into a competition, just like put 2 men together working on anything, and it all of a sudden becomes a time game. So this side was done by Warren Peach. The other side was done by Bernie Vasquez. I will say that Bernie beat the time by a little bit, but when you look at the downright heroic efforts of Warren on this side, I think we know who won. So anyway, how do you rig the wings? Well, most of our information about the airplane was in handwritten notes from Frank, but on the rigging of the wings, we had a few pages. It had a lot to do with, from where I come from, I'm used to digital levels, and I need to know degrees of angle of incidence and the degrees of dihedral, and we're going to start putting all these things together all at once. Well, it had more to do with, let's walk around to the front. When we put the wings together, you start by adjusting this wire to get the dihedral right, because all the wings are hooked together. Well, you tighten this wire up until the top wing can be sighted from one end to the other, so you're just using your eye. Now, how do you adjust these angles? The manual actually said to lay down on the ground and line up the leading edges of the 2 wings until they were straight, and that's how you would do that. So we have all these different wires and no real mention of washout or anything like that. So I decided that, you know, if we compared it to a modern airplane like a Stearman, how much washout would we expect this thing to have compared to a Stearman? Well, I don't have Stearman numbers in my mind, so I called up Addison Pemberton, and I know he does this all the time. Addison, thinking that, you know, I need to use half the washout of a Stearman. How much is in a Stearman? Well, he was real quick to tell me, 0. But he could not tell me how much half of that was. So I think we ended up with the square root. So if we look at all these details, look at the detail work that Frank did on the cables. That is just how they would have done them in the time, hand wrapped and soldered. He had a little bit of trouble the first time. There was some kind of coating on the wire or on the cable, and so it didn't want to hold, and when he was tightening it up, it would loosen up. So he had to get cable from a different source in order to get clean cable that would hold good. And now we come around to the gear, and you can see these are beautifully finished, but what you don't see under the finish is this is actually a spoked wheel and then fabric covered, and so it has that typical drumming sound of fabric, but you can still see the spokes underneath. What a gorgeous job. On the inside there is an access hole for airing the tire. As we come around to the inside, you can see the bungee system for suspension, but no brakes at all. And once again, the only drag you get is through the tail skid. And when we look at the OX5, you can see all of the exposed rockers and straight stacks. The engine's a beautifully smooth running engine, but we have to hand oil all of the rockers, and what we have been told to do is about every 45 minutes. Well, that's less than the endurance of the airplane, but the way we fly the airplane today has a lot more to do with short hops around the field. So every 45 minutes to an hour to re-oil all the rockers is not a big ordeal. And another beautiful wood propeller, and this reminds me so much of the PT-22s and things like that that we get to see so much more of, but the detail work in the propeller is just, you know, one of those treats of these old airplanes. The scimitar shape. So when we think about typical pre-flight of the airplane, we're going to be thinking about oil and fuel. So it has typical of all the WACOs, it has a center fuselage tank for fuel, and that does have enough head pressure for the carburetor. And the oil, instead of having a dipstick like we're used to, where we check it here, there is actually right inside here, I'll have you come around. You can see there is a, if you can get it up here, I don't know if that'll work. There is a level indicator that has a float inside the oil tank, and so you can just look in there and see where it's at. And if you're worried about it being stuck, you can reach in with your hand and move it one way or the other and hear it move, bump the stop, and go. So for starting the airplane, we turn on the fuel, and then on the bottom of the carburetor there's a couple of quick drain valves that we open up, and that's to purge out all the air, make sure that we've got good fuel supply, and it doesn't take very long to do that. We shut those off, and then for priming, this is the choke. So we pull out the choke while pulling the propeller through, and it only takes maybe 3 or 4 blades and it'll start dripping fuel. And the one magneto is turned on, and this is about where the compression stroke is at. And so you can see how you would have it here and the normal pull through of the compression. The difference on this airplane versus others is it has a booster coil on the magneto. So as it comes through the compression stroke, you touch that booster coil and it just pops right off. And now that we've got it figured out, we've been very successful at getting it to light off on the first try almost every time. And we did not talk about the airspeed indicator earlier, but here is the airspeed indicator. And when you think about a Johnson airspeed indicator, I have never really expected them to be accurate. Well, we don't have a GPS in this to calibrate with, but when you fly the airplane, you sure think it's really accurate. We cruise about 65, and so 65, that's at, you know, 1250 to 1300 RPM. Think about how low of RPM that is. That's less power than most people are using for mag checks. You think of a 172, you do a mag check at 1700 RPM. Well, we don't get that. So how do you do a mag check? We only have one magneto. Well, you warm up the engine and it feels pretty good. I guess we'll go. Well, we add the power and we look at the tach. When we have full power and we're pretty static, we're just starting to roll, we're hoping to see somewhere around 1400 RPM. If we don't see 1400 RPM, we're not going to have enough power for takeoff and climb. Something's wrong. Typically, it'll be a spark plug. Well, pretty cheap automotive spark plugs. It's pretty easy to just come back, put in a whole new set of spark plugs and go right back out, and that will typically fix your problem. So when the airplane sets, the first time you fly it, maybe we'll see 1380 RPM, and that's more of an issue of compression. The thing just hasn't run in a while. After we've done that first one, oh, we're seeing 1400 pretty easy, maybe 1410. And as the engine comes to life, it starts flying better and better. So when we're standing out here looking at the wing, we're talking about the way that the wings were rigged and the parts and pieces that Frank made. He also gave us a pilot's operating handbook of sorts. Once again, handwritten notes. He had several things to say that were important. Number one, he wanted us to watch out flying it in too much turbulence, because really the ailerons were just a suggestion to the airplane, and so it really is a rudder airplane, and the ailerons are also really heavy. So all of that says, yeah, nice flying conditions, maybe don't have it out in a big crosswind, but it flies nice. And the other parts that he talked about that were impressive to me was the scariest thing about the airplane to him was how easy it was to land. He said, you just wouldn't expect it. And I thought, okay, well, that's great. We aren't going to be worried about it. But you don't have an airspeed indicator in your view. The sound is different with the OX5. The speed is way slower than anything you're used to flying. So even then, you get on approach and everything just feels different. So there is a little bit of nervousness coming over you. And then as you get down there and you're in the flare, everything comes together and it's just like he said. It's so easy. It just rolls on. And your head is up. The airplane, you're bringing it in on a steeper descent because of the reliability issues of the OX5. So you're coming in on a steeper descent. You can see over the nose just fine. You're looking right through all those rocker arms that are exposed. I mean, they're just right there in the wind. And they sit there and they do just like this. So full power looks about like this. And on approach, you have it at about half that pace. On my first approach, I was coming in and I pulled it back a little more than I wanted, and those things got so slow, I was like, oh, I don't like that, and I put it back up. And that's how you fly the airplane. There's very little to do with glass panels and digital images. This is all about filling the airplane, having it talk to you through the sounds of the wires, the appearance of the rocker arms. It's a very special feeling. Just like I say, you know, the airplane is about these people we work with and the things that it requires to keep an airplane like this flying. And like I say, it's the oldest airplane in the fleet here, and it is one of the more special airplanes. We talk about a lot of the airplanes here at the museum, and we've got all the great airplanes, but here it takes a long time before we say the words P-51, Mustang, Corsair, any of those. We have so many special airplanes that take over your heart like this, and it's a great place to be, and it's great to be able to share this airplane with you.